Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello and welcome friends. This is 7th lecture in this course on political parties and party system in India. And in this lecture today we are going to focus on Indian National Congress and its contribution to Indian politics. In doing that we are going to focus on the major contribution that Indian National Congress has made or contributed to Indian politics, and also we will look at the Nehruvian politics. And after Nehruvian politics, there was a split and struggle for dominance in Indian politics. And finally, we will discuss how during the time of Indira Gandhi, the organizational structure of Congress party was on continuous decline, and this process of weakening and decline of organization has not been reversed yet, and that leads to many of the challenges that Congress party face. So, in the last part we will also discuss the challenges that Congress party faces in the contemporary politics of India, and while we will conclude this lecture, we will also discuss how Congress party and its ideology remain very relevant for Indian politics even in contemporary times, and how it can revive its organization and also reinvent its ideology, which help it to play a significant role once again in Indian politics. So, that would be different segments of this lecture today. We will start with its contribution to Indian politics first. If you recall, in the previous lecture on Indian National Congress, we have discussed how it played, what was its history in pre-independent and also in the post-independent time. We have also discussed its ideology and leadership. Today we are going to focus particularly on its contribution. So, it has a significant role in terms of nationalist movement or struggle for freedom in pre-independent India, and also in the post-independent India, it has played a critical role in strengthening democracy and federal polity, and ensuring popular participation as well. Congress party stands for democratic socialism within the parliamentary and the federal system of parties. So, this is the ideological guiding line for the Congress party in terms of its electoral or democratic contribution. So, it want to create a new society or restructure the society along the line of democratic socialism by avoiding the extremism of the left and also the right. It want to achieve that democratic socialism, that means growth with equity, participation for all, opportunities for all within the parliamentary and federal system of polity. It also stands for the constitutional vision of India and the foundational values of the republic. So, modern India is founded on certain values and principles. Congress party constantly strive for the protection or strengthening of those constitutional and foundational values of Indian Republic. So, it strives towards building an egalitarian, inclusive and prosperous India. If you look at the major contribution of the Congress party to Indian politics, it has been since from the days when it mobilized the masses for the freedom movement, a situation when the very existence of India as a nation or a united nation was under serious apprehension, or there were apprehension about the survival of India as a democracy or Indian nation as a united country. Congress party played a very significant role in the unity and the integrity of the nation during the decades when there was serious doubt or apprehension about the survival of democracy or India as a united nation. So, right from the anti-colonial struggle, even in the post-independent time, it has played a very significant role. The eminent role played by Congress during freedom struggle and its strong leaderships contributed immensely in achieving freedom and nurturing democratic values and Gandhian ideology of non-violence and satyagraha. So, there has been some centralizing tendency or balancing tendency. Gandhian ideology or even BJP, which calls Gandhian socialism, has been one of that factor which balance the extreme of left and right, and political parties over a period of time in India tend to occupy this centrist position. So, Congress party for a very long time and its leadership has nurtured this democratic values on the one hand and Gandhian ideology of non-violence, satyagraha, sarvodaya and antyodaya on the other. So, although Congress party is criticized for several reasons and its power today is under contestation. So, state after the state and even at the national level, its electoral performance is dismal. Yet, it cannot be ignored that Congress in post-colonial period under Nehruvian era played an important role in nation building, economic development, dam building and bringing progress in science and technology. So, Congress right from the Nehruvian days has played a very significant role in rebuilding the nation in terms of economic development in a planned manner, constructing big dams and ensuring progress in science and technology and industrial growth and so on. It also ensured that the voting right is made available to every adult member of the country. So, there was apprehension whether India with just 15% of literate population will realize the value or significance of this right to vote or not, and there were many apprehension that whether all Indian should be given this right to vote or not. Congress party has made this stand that this voting right, the participation in the electoral process should be made available to every adult member of Indian citizen without any discrimination on the basis of caste, class, gender and also literacy or property. So, for a very long time in most of the democracy, this franchise or right to vote was limited to those who were literate and also had some property. Even in India during the colonial times, there were sections of the society who had this right to vote, but it was not available to all the adult members of Indian population. Congress party has ensured that every adult member should have the right to vote and thereby a stake and also an opportunity to participate in the electoral process of the country. Besides that, it also ensured that freedom of individuals and minority rights are protected, equal opportunities are made available to all, and above all government should reach particularly to those who are excluded and are at the margin of Indian society. So, the Congress party's philosophy was guided by this idea that the growth is required we can achieve growth through industrial development with the key role played by science and technology, but that growth should be um, um, for the benefit of every section of the society, particularly those who were excluded or at the margin of Indian society, and that has significant contribution in changing the social economic status of many communities in India, particularly those who were at the margin of Indian society. Congress has also played an important role in maintaining and strengthening the federal structure of Indian polity. So, we have seen in many other post colonial countries in Asia and Africa, democracy transforming into an authoritarian regime or one party rule. However, in Indian case, we have seen over a period of time how both democracy and also the federal structure of power has strengthened over a period of time. So, in the party system, we have seen that how even when Congress party has absolute dominance in the national or in the state politics, there was the competitive multi parties that were in the existence, they were allowed to participate, and eventually from 70s there was the rise of many regional parties, and since 90s we have seen again the rise of BJP. So, this shows clearly the growing strength of federal structure and the vibrant competitive nature of party system and democracy in India. Congress party has played a very important role in ensuring this growth and strengthening of democracy and federal structure. By enacting acts like 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Acts, Congress has made local self-government. This is the crucial act that was passed by the Congress government in 90s. By that, it has ensured that the local self-government truly becomes a third tier of government. So, there was the panchayats or municipalities even before the enactment of this act, but after this Constitutional Amendment Act, these local self bodies got the constitutional position, and that has forced the states to continuously hold the elections for these bodies, and it has also ensured that the communities and groups directly participate in the governance or take responsibility in terms of managing the affairs that affect them collectively. So, this 73rd and 74th Amendment Act has ensured both popular and direct participation of the communities in the process of governance, and it has truly made federal structure in India as three tier of government, starting from the federal government at the center to the provincial government in states, and also these local self bodies in panchayats and municipalities in urban and rural India. It has enacted many laws and legislation for the social equality, such as reservation for the SCs and STs, scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, Prevention of Atrocities Act 1989, Women's Reservation and Safety Bills, reservation of 33% seats in panchayats and municipalities in the enactment which we have just discussed, 73rd and 74th Amendment Act, reserved 33% of the seats for the women. These laws and legislation has greatly contributed in the emancipation of women and Dalits. Similarly, in 2013, Congress party government in UPA 2 enacted a legislation called sexual harassment of women at workplace, prevention, prohibition and redressal 2013. Now, this act will go a long way in ensuring the safety of working women. So, there is demographic changes and transformation in India, and there are new aspirations, and Congress party from time to time has helped in ensuring that laws and legislation are made in a way where ordinary people or the common men and women in India get maximum opportunity to develop themselves, to develop their skill and contribute in the nation building without discriminating on the basis of their social, economic, religious, ethnic background. So, it is kind of very inclusive or egalitarian approach to politics, laws and legislation. Big industries regarded as temples of modern India and planned economic development, which was started by Nehru, influenced by the Russian model of planned economic development, along with green and white revolution in terms of agriculture and dairy products, new liberal reforms in 90s which opened up the economy to the world economy and thereby lead to new era of growth and economic development in India since 90s. These all are started by Congress, which has played an important role in all around rapid economic growth in the country. So, all these contribution made by Congress party or initiated by the Congress party, such as big industries, science, technology, planned economic development during Nehru, and green and white revolution and new liberal economic reforms after that has all contributed in the rapid economic growth and development in the country. It is another major contribution, particularly during 2004 and 14, UPA 1 and 2 led by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, where Congress party played a leading role. It has developed a new right based approach to welfare. So, because of the social and economic condition of the majority of population in India, welfare was one of the crucial policies and programs for the government, starting from community development program by Nehru and many other such welfare measures to Indira Gandhi's famous slogan of Garibi Hatao or alleviate poverty, and many other governments similarly formulate different policies and programs to abolish poverty in India and to have different kinds of welfare programs in health, in food, in education and so on. For the first time, these welfare program or PDS, public distribution system and so on. These welfare programs, however, was based on some kind of claim made by the population to different political parties. For the first time, many of these welfare programs during 2004 to 14, there is a kind of right based approach to the welfare. That means, the population not just have a claim which a party in government can accept or reject, but it has a legal right, and that means the party in power must fulfill those responsibility or obligation to the population or to the electorates. So, this has ushered in new kind of approach to the welfare programs and welfare politics in India. It has enacted legislation such as Right to Information Act in 2005, where it is the right of the citizen to get the information about the working of the government, its expenditure on various programs and so on. it has the potential of not only bringing in transparency in the conduct of governing or in the process of governing, but it also empower the citizen to hold the government accountable, thereby no information can be concealed from the public. So, the government and the functioning of government is open to public scrutiny, and this aspect of democracy is absolutely vital when the government and those who are in the position of power must be accountable to the public, and the decisions they take or do not take should be open to public scrutiny, and that is how democracy survive, evolve and become mature, and a process we call democratization and deepening of democracy requires that information is widely available to the people for public scrutiny. Similarly, other acts like Mahatma Gandhi NREGA, National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, it gives the legal right to every citizen of India for 100 days of employment. Now, again this employment was something where many government worked, but now it has been made a kind of legal right for the individual to get 100 days of employment with minimum wage. Similarly, Forest Rights Act, Rights to Education, National Food Security Act, these are the acts where social services or welfare programs of the government is no longer seen merely as a claim of the population or electorates to different parties, but it is now their right, and that means the party in power must fulfill those obligations as it is no longer on their discretion to accept or reject, but it has been made legally mandatory for them to fulfill those programs. These legislations certainly have the potential to empower the people. Therefore, the power is not there with the parties or with the government or state institution, but it has the potential to give power to the people, empower them more and more in terms of understanding the way government function, their socio-economic condition, their educational status, to take more active participation and interest in nation building, and thereby contributing in the national prosperity or the progress of the nation. Similarly, during the Indira Gandhi regime, it enacted many legislation for the protection of environment. So, the environmental issue became a very crucial point now, but way back in 1970s and 80s under the Indira Gandhi leadership, Congress party also enacted many legislation to protect environment. Thus, Congress may have lost the electoral dominance it enjoyed, and also the majority of its popular support base, particularly with the rise of Modi and the BJP. However, it cannot be denied that the Congress, the oldest party, has ensured the national unity and integrity, and founded the republic on the values of liberal and constitutional form of democracy. So, it is often to reject the contribution of Congress party, and in many of the contemporary discourse you find politicians, parties and critics often challenge the contribution made by the Congress party. But if we compare the condition of India after 200 years of exploitation by the British, the 15% of literacy rate, dismal state of economic or industrial growth, from there to where India is now in terms of science, technology, industrial growth, per capita income, life expectancy, literacy, popular participation, the maturity of democracy and so on, and its vibrant nature which opens up the possibility of all kind of parties, all kind of formulation, is something which we have to give credit to the Congress party, where many other post colonial nation in Asia and Africa had taken authoritarian or undemocratic turn, India with a small period, with the exception of 1975 to 77, has by and large maintained the parliamentary democracy and growth with democracy, which is a significant achievement considering the heterogeneous nature of India, its plurality and diversity, and Congress party has played a very significant role in ensuring that. Now, if we briefly look at the different phases of its contribution and thereby changing nature of Indian National Congress, in Nehruvian politics, we find that this politics was characterized by a kind of consensus, and there was not much serious contestation to the ideas and the policies formulated by the Nehru. So, after independence, starting with his Tryst with Destiny speech and the promises and programs, there has been some kind of consensus among the elites about the values of democracy, federalism, socialism and secularism. So, in this phase there was the attempt to reconstruct Indian society, and to reconstruct Indian society does not mean the continuity of the old practices or complete abandoning of those practices. So, to reconstruct Indian society, there has to be certain vision, and that vision was provided by the socialism. Of course, there was other competing visions represented by many other political parties, for example, Communist Party or Bharatiya Jan Sangh and also Socialist Party, but Congress Party represented a vision of radically restructuring Indian society to make it a more egalitarian, inclusive, plural society on socialist line. This socialism or socialist reconstruction of Indian society has to be done within a parliamentary form of democracy, which protects the minority rights, and secularism, which is now a kind of taboo or a kind of negative connotation associated with the word socialism. But if you compare with the polarized debates on the eve of independence, secularism has seen that India has maintained the neutrality or independence and autonomy of a state and in its institution from any kind of community oriented policies and programs of the state. So, Indian state remains secular, has a very significant appeal to all the parties in the post independent time. So, this Nehruvian phase of politics is characterized by this kind of consensus among the elite about the democratic federal nature of polity, reconstruction of society along the socialist line or socialist principle, and protecting the rights of minority by ensuring the secular nature of Indian politics. And the secular nature of politics means that religion has no role to play in the matters of polity or in the decisions of the state. That does not mean the religion is criticized or religion is banned or prohibited. If you look at the constitution of India, it protects the individual right to worship or not to worship. What it does is that the religion of individual or community will not have influence on the decision or the policy making of the states. However, there is a shift in this kind of secular politics, particularly in 1980s, we will discuss in a minute, but here this Nehruvian politics of consensus revolved around these philosophy of democracy, federalism, socialism and secularism. and his leadership is seen as the leadership of a modernizing elite, which wanted to have rapid economic transformation, or a model of democracy which is influenced by the Western parliamentary model of democracy. So, Nehruvian politics is largely seen as a kind of modernizing elite in India, which want to reconstruct the Indian society by giving role to science and technology, by promoting rapid heavy industrial growth, and key role that is given to the science and technology. So, Nehruvian politics focused on socialism, mixed economy, plant development, dam building, and advancement of science and technology. His involvement in non-aligned movement and doctrine of Panchsheel is very important for us to understand. So, this non-alignment movement was initiated by post-colonial countries in a condition where world was divided into two blocks, led by USA and USSR. So, the capitalist world or the socialist communist world, and in this era of what we call Cold War, these countries in Asia and Africa wanted to maintain the sovereignty and protect their independence and autonomy in terms of their foreign policy and so on. So, non-aligned movement was a significant step where Nehru played a major role, and also his doctrine of Panchsheel, which is based on peaceful coexistence, that talks about the 5 principles or 5 seal. These are respect for each other's territorial integrity and sovereignty, non-aggression, that means resolving the conflict through dialogue, non-interference, that means the internal matters of any country should not be interfered with by the other countries, equality and mutual benefit, that is cooperation for the mutual benefit or economic development, and the peaceful coexistence. So, these 5 principles or silas, which is called Panchshila, along with non-aligned movement, guided India's foreign policy for decades. And these two principles of non-alignment and doctrine of Panchsheel also guided the foreign policies of many newly independent countries in Asia and Africa. So, it has huge influence not just on the foreign policies of India for many decades, but also on many newly independent nations in Asia and Africa. Congress party during the Nehru era dominated the politics in India, both in the state and the national level that we have discussed during the party system, where the first phase is called the Congress system, precisely because the dominating position of Congress party. However, immediately after his death, factionalism and inner rivalries in the party became more and more explicit, which we see when there is a struggle for dominance after the split in the party in 1969. So, after the death of Nehru, there started a gradual disenchantment with the Nehruvian consensus. So, even among the elites, many socialist parties or peasant groups develop a kind of disenchantment with this Nehruvian consensus that we have talked about. So, if you look at the Janata Party formation, they were ideologically divided in terms of their approach to the policies and vision of India. However, they were united in one sense. Immediately they were opposed to the excesses of Indira Gandhi during the emergency, but they were all critical of the policies of Nehru also. So, from 1970s there is also a growth in India where there was critique of Nehru among many ideological groups and political parties, not just Bharatiya Janata Party or its earlier avatar Bharatiya Janata Sangh. So, After the death of Nehru, there started a gradual disenchantment with the Nehruvian consensus that we have discussed, and also with the Congress party, and that leads to the rise of many regional parties and also formation of Janata parties at the center. As discussed in the previous lecture, Congress party had factions within the party because it represented the ideological spectrum from left to right and cross sections of the Indian society. So, it was a kind of reconciliatory force or platform where different segments, different sections of Indian society raised their voice, and policy decisions were taken through consensus, negotiation and bargaining and so on. However, after the death of Nehru, these factions or rivalries lead to explicit infighting or a split in 1969, and this split in 1969 was the result of syndicates, a group of leaders emerging in the party which wanted to control the party, and because of the rise of Indira Gandhi, they wanted to seize the power or to control the parties, and this fighting lead to a split in 1969. Indira Gandhi formed her own party in Indian Congress or revisionist, and it won a thumping victory in 1971. The other group was called Indian National Congress Organization. So, this a split between revisionist and organization leads to the weakening of organization, where Indira Gandhi maintained the electoral victory, but organizationally Congress party began to lose its ground or its effectiveness. So, the party led by Indira Gandhi was known as New Congress. The original Congress party was called the Indian National Congress or organization, which was under the leadership of Kamaraj. It was called the Old Congress, which was dominated by the syndicates, a group of leaders including Morarji Desai and many others who wanted to control the party organization. The split between Indian National Congress R and Indian National Congress O, revisionist and organization, was seen by some as the division between left and right. So, as we have discussed, the ideologically there was the presence of all kinds of views within the Congress platform, which in 1969 becomes quite explicit, and it leads to the split in the party. Mrs. Gandhi wanted to have popular mass support and wanted to personalized power with populist agenda, whereas Indian National Congress organization were supported by many regional party elites which wanted to focus on organization and party principle rather than personality cult. Indira Gandhi led New Congress had to face defeat in 1977 after the emergency, and Indian National Congress organization merged with the Jan Sangh, Bharatiya Lok Dal and Socialist Party to form Janata Party, and against the INCR of Mrs. To fight INC National Congress led by Mrs. Gandhi, and they formed the government for the brief period. So, in 1978 Gandhi formed a new party called Congress I, where I stand for Indira. So, it was a phase where the party revolved around the personality of Indira Gandhi, and there were many compromises in terms of its organizational strength and regional or state leadership. So, in 1981 the National Election Commission declared it this party Congress I as the Indian National Congress, and in 1996 the I was dropped from the party's name, and in 1979 Gandhi retained a parliamentary seat, and in the next year 1980s he was elected as the PM. So, there was the revival of Congress at the national level, but there has been compromises in terms of party organization or electing party leaders through election or inner democracy in the party. However, the electoral dominance of the Congress party in this phase was over. So, there was a kind of shift which we have discussed when we were discussing party system in India. Since 1967 there was the growth of regional party, and in 80s and 90s there was many Janata party formations and also the rise of BJP, which decisively shift the center of Indian politics from Congress to other parties and now to the BJP. Congress party had to face a lot of challenges in this phase. To discuss very briefly the Indira Gandhi and the organizational decline, which started with the continuous faction splits and party rivalries, which had weakened the organization or organizational structure of the Congress party, personalization of power and the rise of high command culture that started during Indira Gandhi terms deteriorated it even further. So, instead of autonomy and independent voices, loyalty began to characterize the party, and it matters in the politics that developed in 1980s and 90s in Indian National Congress. Thereby, it lost its strong network of information gathering, which gave party the position of dominance and penetration in Indian society. It revolved around the leader or the personality, thereby the organization, its strong network of information gathering declined, and there was no effort to revive those organization structure and networks for collecting the information which represent the voice of the different strata of Indian society. People were losing trust in the party organization, particularly during emergency days when it suspended the constitution, which resulted into curtailment of fundamental rights and freedom of individual, state intervention in privacy, imposition of family planning programs and forced sterilization and so on. So, these excessive role of the state in dictating the lives of the citizen led to a kind of mistrust with the party and the government that Indira Gandhi led. So, these development in absence of inner party democracy reduced the Congress party to Gandhi Nehru family, and their charisma, the leadership of Nehru Gandhi family was seen as the key for electoral victory. So, this narrowing down of party politics to a family and to leaders' charisma for winning election further weakened the party organization. So, as we have discussed in the previous lecture, how this weakening of organization was recognized by many leaders starting from Rajiv Gandhi to many others, but there has been very little done to revive the organization and the efficiency of the Congress organization, which at one point of time had penetrated different sections of Indian society. So, that remains the biggest lacuna or reason for the decline of Congress party in contemporary politics. Now, if we look at some of the contemporary challenges that Congress party is facing, the Congress party in contemporary Indian politics faces many challenges, and in some states like West Bengal, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Tamil Nadu and Gujarat, it has not been in power for almost 30 years. So, it is said about the Congress party, once it lose for a very long period of time. So, in the states which I have just said, like West Bengal, UP, Bihar, Tamil Nadu and Gujarat, it was not in power for almost 3 decades, 30 years now. And in 2014 and 2019 election, it is losing support base further to the opposition party in Tripura and in Odisha, where BJP is occupying the space once occupied by the Congress. And similarly, in other states, there are regional parties occupying the space which was earlier occupied by the Congress party. So, from the position of dominance, it has come down to a status where its vote share has also come down to 20%. So, if you remember 1948 achieving close to 48% of the vote share and absolute majority, its strength has come down to 20% of close to about 20% of the vote share, and its Lok Sabha tally has come down to 44 and 52 in 2014 and 29 election. So, in other words, the grand old party in Indian politics faces many challenges in contemporary politics. The first and foremost challenges to Congress is to redefine its ideology. There is no clarity in terms of what Congress party stands for, and there is certainly confusion about its stand. So, not being a cleavages party, that means caste based or any specific social groups party, has certain advantage in terms of ability of the Congress party to mobilize cross sections of electorates. So, in terms of first past the post system, the national party or a party which is not based on any ethnic groups or any caste groups has certain advantage in terms of mobilizing the electorates across the sections of Indian society or electorates. Congress party had that advantage. So, for instance, if you look at parties based on particular caste or particular ethnicity, those parties are dominant only among those castes or those region where those castes are dominant. In comparison to that, Congress party has the ability to mobilize the cross section of the electorates, because it is not a cleavages party. However, to mobilize this cross section of electorates require an ideological cohesion, which has become a problem for Congress party in contemporary decades. So, from socialist democracy or democratic socialism to planned development to secularism, confusion is what characterized the ideology of Congress party in recent times. And emergency further was a kind of turning point, whether its commitment even to the democracy was seriously challenges or doubted, and many people doubt its intention. So, further its decision to open the gates of Babri Masjid and revising the Supreme Court judgment in Shah Bano case was seen as a compromise with secularism, where these two decisions of the Congress party to open the gates of Babri Masjid and also reverse the Supreme Court judgment to judgment in Shah Bano case was seen as a compromise with the secularism. And although through these acts or decision, Congress party tries to appease the both communities, Hindu and Muslims in India, but end up losing the support from the both. So, there was the consolidation of the BJP on its majoritarian plank, and also Muslims turns toward many regional parties. So, this compromise with its secular strand in not using religion or interfering religion in decisions of the state, it has emboldened many parties, particularly from the right wing parties BJP, to question its secular credential, where secularism of Congress party in 1980s or 90s was seen largely as in minority appeasement policy. And BJP called the secularism of the Congress party as negative secularism, where their own version of secularism they call positive secularism. and that leads to the crisis of secularism debates in India, where there many scholars argued about different connotation, different interpretation. However, since then the value and appeal of secularism has gone down so low that in previous 2 elections of Lok Sabha, secularism has hardly been an issue for any political party. It also lead to many scholars suspect that Congress may end up imitating BJP policy in its attempt to garner the support of the majority community. So, the charges of minority appeasement and its attempt to mobilize or garner the support among the majority community, many scholars or critics argue that it may end up imitating the policies and programs of the BJP. However, Congress of today is very different. It is no longer a party of rainbow coalition. So, unlike 1950s and 60s, where it represented the ideology from the left to the right and cross section of the Indian society, Congress party of today is very different from that kind of rainbow coalition. Faction of the left and right has already left the party, and many scholars argue that it remain, the Congress party remain a hollow centrist party in the absence of left and right. So, within the party there is a kind of hollowness in terms of its centrist position, which has very little appeal to different cross section of Indian society, which is represented by other regional parties and also BJP. So, in popular perception, Congress party is often equated with corruption and dynasty rule of a Nehru Gandhi family. In the political discourse of Mandir and Mandal, Congress party hardly took any clear stand and ceded further ground to the parties representing intermediary castes, various regional parties in North India and also in South, and also to the BJP. So, there was a kind of a crisis in terms of taking a clear stand on many of the issues, particularly in 90s, when there was a debate around Mandal, that is greater representation to the intermediary or the OBC and also the Ram Janmabhoomi movement. Congress party hardly took a decisive or clear stand. So, Congress has a hard and tough battle, not just to assert its ideology of inclusive nationalism, but also growth with equity. So, this is the major challenge for the Congress party of today. Congress is also in terms of ideology, Congress is also facing the ideology of lack of effective organization, and the process of decline in the organization ability started in 1970s after the split in the party and personalization and centralization of power by Indira Gandhi, as we have discussed. Related to organizational decline is its leadership crisis, where it does not have a strong leadership in many of Indian states. Although Sonia Gandhi in recent decades started this process of giving more autonomy to the Congress chief ministers in the state, however, party has a long way to go for nurturing leadership and re-energizing its cadre and organization, which remains the critical challenge for the party in contemporary politics. Party lacks a massive mass support in present times due to its weak organization and elite leadership, which is cut off from the masses. So, there is very few leaders in the Congress which can mobilize the masses, which is who can be seen as the mass leader. So, in the era of coalition politics, Congress also need to work proactively for better alliance with parties like Trinamool Congress, National Congress Party or YSR Congress in Andhra Pradesh and also in Telangana. So, these parties particularly are breakaways faction from the Congress and differ very little in terms of ideology, policy and programs of the Congress party. So, Congress party has the prospect or scope to form proactive alliances with these parties. Moreover, the major challenges to the Congress in contemporary times is to counter the tremendous mass support to the BJP and NDA, BJP led NDA and the charismatic leadership of Prime Minister Modi. And while countering this tremendous mass support to BJP and the charismatic leadership of Prime Minister Modi, Congress party has to also ensure that it should not lose its ideological distinctiveness. That will remain a big challenge for the Congress party. So, to conclude this lecture, one has to acknowledge that Congress has played a critical role in both pre and post independent Indian politics, and it remains the grand old party in Indian politics, which dominated the political discourse in the country for decades. Ideologically, it stands for democratic socialism, secularism, and rapid growth with a human face. That means protecting the interest and concerns of the common man. It has successfully, to a great extent, has avoided the ideological extreme of both left and right, and present an inclusive notion of Indian nationalism, in contrast to the exclusive notion of nationalism represented by many other groups and parties. Thus, the ideology of the Congress party remain very relevant to the politics in India today, for the politics in India today, and it has played Congress party has played a significant role in independence, in drafting a liberal constitution, in protecting the rights of marginal and minority communities, in legislating environment protection laws, in enacting 73rd and 74th Amendment Acts, in bringing about economic reforms, and starting a right based approach to welfare by enacting legislation such as RTI, right to education, Manarega, right to food, and so on. These policy measures have played a significant role in alleviating people from the abject poverty. However, its electoral performance have been dismal, and many scholars analyzing the decline and dwindling electoral performances of the Congress party have begun to write the obituary of the party. But looking at its electoral performance in recently held assembly elections in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and also in Gujarat, it would be premature to write of Congress as it. So, among the many scholars, there is a debate whether Congress party can play an effective role of opposition, or should it ban itself, or there should be alternative to the Congress when it comes to play an effective role to the BJP. So, because of its dismal electoral performance, there has been debate about the prospect or the future of Congress party, where if we look at its electoral performance in the recently held assembly election in Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Gujarat, we see Congress party has the organization or the ideological inheritance to counter the ideology and policies of the BJP. Although there are many effective regional parties which also oppose BJP, but at the national level Congress alone can play that role, and it is quite possible that while playing the role of opposition, Congress may regain its ideological clarity and also revive its organizational strength. Now, with revival of it is a kind of hypothetical prospect, but for the sake of discussion, if such revival of ideology and organizational strength happens within the Congress party, would we see the growth of two-party system in India as Duverger predicted, that first past the post system, there is likelihood of politics consolidating between the two parties. Now, future alone would prove this thesis right or wrong. However, if we look at the national government, we have seen during the discussion on party system that how there is bipolarization or consolidation of parties at the state level. Since 99, there is some kind of consolidation into two groups, NDA and the UPA, led by BJP and the Congress, which have been in power since 99, and power alternates between the two. So, can we see the growth of this bipolar politics which future alone would prove right or wrong. However, Congress party do have the ideological inheritance and also nationwide organizational presence to tackle the dominance of the BJP. So, Congress party remain in ideologically and also in terms of organization a very relevant force in Indian politics. So, with that I conclude this lecture. The themes that I have discussed today, you can refer to the readings which is mentioned here, like Joya Hassan, Parties and Party Politics in India, Suranjan Das, The Nehru Years in Indian Politics, Ramchandra Guha, 1970s, India is Indira Gandhi and Indira Gandhi is India, Rajni Kothari, Party System, Praveen Rai and Sanjay Kumar, The Decline of the Congress Party in Indian Politics, Sudha Pai, Regional Parties and Emerging Patterns of Politics in India, and you should also refer to the website of the Indian National Congress Party to understand its policies, programs, ideologies and the promises. So, that is all for today's lecture. I hope you enjoyed it and thanks for patience. Thank you all.